You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing the original series episode, Space Seed. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel is Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
Father Corey couldn't be with us this week, but he'll be back, and I want to let you know that you can get your very own Secrets of Star Trek t-shirt featuring me and Jimmy and Father Corey by visiting sqpn.com/merch. And another show on the StarQuest Network you're sure to enjoy is The Secrets of Technology, which you can find wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/technology. So we are talking about this first season episode, Space Seed. Jimmy, can you give us a recap of what happens?
This week, Captain Kirk and the gang run across an old Earth sleeper ship, and its captain wakes up, a man who identifies himself as Khan. Just Khan. And he's a very impressive dude, but they soon realize that he's really Khan Noonian Singh, former dictator of a quarter of the globe from back in the 1990s eugenics wars. And the rest of his crew are the genetic supermen from that time who escaped into space at the end of the war. Khan ultimately wakes up the rest of his crew and they take control of the Enterprise, and he tries to suffocate Kirk by putting him in a pressurization chamber. But Lieutenant Marla McGivers, a historian who's fallen in love with Khan, frees Kirk. Kirk and Spock then flood the ship with sleep gas to take out Khan's crew, but Khan blocks the gas from getting into engineering, and he sets the engines on overload. Kirk heads to engineering, where his stunt double takes a real beating at the hands of Khan, who has 5 times his strength. Ultimately, Kirk knocks Khan out and cancels the overload. Afterwards, at a court-martial, Kirk drops the charges against Khan and his crew and exiles them to a habitable but wild planet called Ceti Alpha 5. And given the choice between prosecution and exile, Marla McGivers goes with them. At the end, Spock says it would be interesting to come back in 100 years and see what Khan was able to build out of that world, but we won't have to wait that long. We'll only have to wait 15 years. The end.
That's right. So, Jimmy, what do you think of Space Seed?
Oh, this is a great episode. It's got tons of good stuff in it. It's no surprise that this was, one that they used for as the basis for Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, which by some people is wrongly, but still by many people is considered the best of the Star Trek movies. It is a really good Star Trek movie, though. I'm not surprised that this one was good because even though the story was proposed by a guy named Kerry Wilbur, who also wrote the first draft, it was heavily rewritten by Gene Kuhn. And Gene Kuhn is an excellent author. He did some of the best Star Trek episodes, and for a time was like, kind of co-showrunner sort of. So this is a really good episode.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, especially bringing in Ricardo Montalban as a guest star, who just has so much on-screen charisma, just so much presence.
But dude, I mean, it's such an injustice, though. I mean, he's portraying a Sikh, and he's not a Sikh; he's a Mexican. I mean, this is a horror. You can't have people playing a different race than what they are.
Representation gone wrong. I'm also mad they didn't get real Vulcans. So, speaking of which, it could have been even worse because originally Khan in the original story was apparently not going to be Indian or Sikh, but Nordic, and his name was going to be Ragnar Thorwald, which is
about as Norse as you can get.
Yes, that would have been a very different. And
in fact,
the Wrath of Ragnar.
It's more Norse than you can get.
Yeah, right. Yes, it would be the Wrath of or Thorwald or Ragnar. That would be very weird. And just to point out, which Star Trek fans have been pointing out ever since The Wrath of Khan came out, Chekhov was not yet in the series. Walter Koenig was not.
We can pretend he's there. We just haven't seen him.
Yeah. He's just hasn't been gotten to the bridge yet. Even though Khan, points him out in Wrath of Khan, like he recognizes him. So what we have is this idea, this overarching idea is the British penal colonies of the 18th and 19th century, where they transported, that was the term they used.
Yeah, they would
criminals
sentence you to transportation.
Right. and they would send them off to places, including famously Australia, and including Botany Bay, which is what the ship was named after. That was a little bit on the nose naming that ship, wasn't it? And they were a seed of a new colony for Britain in that side. So what we have here is the title Space Seed. So, it's kind of interesting.
So Ceti Alpha 5 is the new Space Australia.
Yes, where everything wants to kill you.
Yeah.
Wow, they really went for that story. Pretty good. It's interesting that in the writing, when this story was proposed, Gene Roddenberry actually brought up the objection. Why would they waste what would have been a high-tech spaceship, a valuable resource in a time of scarcity, on sending a bunch of criminals into space? There's other ways you could have dealt with criminals. You could have executed them, imprisoned them, or whatever. And although I think later on it seems like Khan was escaping as opposed to being exiled.
Yeah, but it does have historical precedent. Shipping your criminals off to try to get some productive use out of them, they can build you a colony overseas.
Mm-hmm. But it's interesting how they incorporated that objection into the script.
Mm-hmm.
Kirk and Spock later on bring up this very point.
Yep.
And the idea of a bunch of Napoleons was this answer to it, that this crew was a bunch of Napoleons. Although in the final episode, none of them except Khan feel like they would have been leaders of another country. Like these were supposed to be all of the dictators of 2/3 of the earth.
They and they're all following Khan pretty obediently.
Yeah. In both in this and in Wrath of Khan. So,
by the way, there's one character who now Memory Alpha classifies him as two different characters based on the spelling of the name. But I think they probably intended to be the same guy. So in this, Khan has an assistant, like several of them get names, but we don't even know which name is attached to which person.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the augments is named Joaquin. And there is a similar character. He doesn't look the same, but there's a character in Wrath of Khan played by Judson Scott whose name is Joaquim. So it's the same name. It's just one of them finishes with an N and one of them finishes with an M. But that's the kind of difference I think could be unintentional. I think they're probably meant to be the same guy.
I agree. That would be silly otherwise. Like, why would you have it so close and not be different? Yeah.
Especially when there's only 72 of them who are still alive, and you're going to have a Joaquim and a Joaquin in the same group of 72 Napoleons.
Yeah, I can just see Khan saying, "That's too confusing. I'm just going to rename you Bob." So we have, just like in Doctor Who, we have the unit dating problem. We have a Star Trek dating problem where the eugenics wars occurred in the 90s,
the mid 90s.
Yeah,
and the historian Marla McGivers says that sleeper ships like this were needed until about 2018. Right. Which would suggest warp drive was invented by 2018.
Yeah.
And so none of that happened. Also, Spock implies that the eugenics war in the 90s was the Third World War.
Right.
And so, well, okay, that's changed. And
First Contact shows us that has changed. Yeah.
Yeah. And they addressed this last season on Strange New Worlds in the Tomorrow. Yeah. Where they go back to the early 21st century and they find out that Khan is only a small boy in the early 21st century because the timeline has shifted.
Right. Kirk says something to the effect of, due to multiple time travel incursions over the years,
most of which were caused by Kirk himself.
Right. And maybe even the temporal Cold War. We could drag that into this as well. And so that was not only delayed the eugenics war until the first half of the 21st century, but that Khan himself wasn't even born by 1996, presumably in the early 2020s, or however you want to put it in that Strange New Worlds episode. So just to kind of point, fans, we love to point out these errors as Star Trek progresses through times that they've talked about on screen, and then the things don't happen.
They also imply that Star Trek is taken. They haven't firmly settled on when Star Trek occurs yet. They gave different dates or clues that pointed to different dates in the original series, and here they're talking as if they're 200 years in advance of the eugenics wars, which would put them in like 2197 as opposed to 2263.
Right. That's eventually where they settle on this occurring. 2 centuries or a couple hundred years is kind of vague. I could see someone being vague with the dating. I do like in the beginning when they're scanning and tracking down the Botany Bay, Kirk catches Spock in a mistake, and Spock says,
"Yep."
I wonder why it gives you such pleasure to catch me in errors. Like it just is. It's like that's very annoying of you, and I can't say it's annoying because I'm a Vulcan, but it's annoying. It's very clearly annoying. I'd like that. That was a good one. There is a strange. Kirk has a strange attitude throughout this where he's so dismissive of McGivers from the beginning, that historian, give her, finally she can have something to do. He doesn't like her right from the start. And like even when she shows up late to the transporter room, he's like, hey, get a move on. Let's go. It's kind of an odd thing.
It's also an odd thing having a historian on a starship. What is she doing there? I mean, even they even hang a lantern on this in the script because Kirk, as he's heading down to the transporter room, says, "Oh, and get that ship's historian McGivers," and Spock says McGivers. And Kirk says, "Yeah, it'll give her something to do for a change." It's like, well, yeah, that is an issue. Now, if she's a xeno historian or a xenoarchaeologist, that would make sense. But what do you need an expert on Earth history for on your ship?
Yeah, I would like if you're going to have a historian, there would be a historian of, other cultures, other worlds, and
an anthropologist,
right? But also, like an anthropologist to collect the histories of other cultures you encounter. That would make sense too. That's how I kind of headcanon it. But he just does not. Kirk does not like her. Like this is unusual for Kirk, a pretty woman on board the Enterprise.
He's just jealous of Khan even before he appears.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. McCoy is famously cranky about transporters. He gives out his whole beaming my atoms across space bit here. I don't know if is that new? Is this here where we get that?
Well, I don't know if it's this. It may be. I haven't looked that up. This is first season, so this could be the origin of that. So they've established McCoy has fear of flying and, via transporter, and he's correctly perceived that this is a seeming murder machine, at least depending on which version of how it works you buy.
Right.
Because in Next Gen, they retcon it to where it's not actually killing you because Barclay has experiences in the middle of transport.
Right. He has memory of what's going on in it. So they get over to Botany Bay, and it's kind of interesting. In the 60s, sci-fi prop version, they actually built a pretty decent set for the 60s. But it reminds me a little bit of the Roman catacombs, where they have these niches that the bodies are laid in. It's kind of interesting way of doing that,
and they're really deep too, because when Khan's opens up, they shove out, they've got some stagehands behind there who shove out the pallet he's on. Yeah. And it's real wide. And so it's like, he must have just got on the inner side of it and they closed it up, and he's got all this space on his other side.
I know. It is funny that Scotty mentions the use of transistors on board. So they got suspended animation and, ships to go out to space with transistors, the old-fashioned transistors. I thought that was kind of fun. I always like to point out how they kind of get their future predictions a little bit off. So, again, McGivers gets dressed down by Kirk for being distracted at how beautiful Khan is, which is it's kind of funny. She's sort of like staring at him. It's a little uncomfortable, I have to say. I was a little bit cringe. But McCoy does. It's funny how McCoy rates Kirk as a fair psychologist as captain. You know, where he's because Kirk has to motivate McGivers and kind of use his understanding of people. But that's leadership. That's what makes Kirk a good captain, is he understands how to motivate people based on what motivates them and get them to do their job. So I thought that was fun.
Incidentally, we might want to comment on the name Noonian Singh that keeps cropping up in Star Trek. So we've got Khan Noonian Singh. We've got Data's creator is Noonian Song or Sung. And now we've got Lon Noonian Singh on Star Trek. So what's with all these Noonian Singh variations? Well, it turns out that that Gene Roddenberry had a friend in the Second World War who was a pilot, and his name was Kim Noonian Singh. And Roddenberry had lost touch with him and hoped that using this name might catch his attention wherever he is out there in the public and prompt him to make contact again. But kind of as an homage to his former pilot friend, we get these variations on Kim Noonian Singh across Star Trek.
Oh, that's fascinating. I didn't know that. Yeah, I wonder if he ever made touch with him. I mean, because Khan became pretty big in pop culture.
Yep, especially after the movie.
Yes. So once Khan wakes up, there's this great scene where McCoy is kind of I had to say he's kind of a badass in the scene because Khan wakes up and like grabs him by the throat and holds a scalpel.
This is awesome.
Neck.
Yeah. I got the dialogue from this.
Okay.
McCoy says, well, either choke me or cut my throat. Make up your mind.
Yes.
And Khan says, English. I thought I dreamed it. Where am I? And McCoy says, and Khan squeezes him. You're in a bed holding a knife at your doctor's throat. Answer my question. It would be most effective if you would cut the carotid artery just under the left ear.
Cool.
And at that point, Khan lets him go. I like a brave man. I was simply trying to avoid an argument. You're aboard the United Spaceship Enterprise. Your vessel is in tow.
Nice. McCoy was so awesome in that scene. That was really a great scene to see him. He's not just a country doctor. He's tough. He's a tough guy.
Khan also is he's got a real attitude. That's meant to make him compelling according to the mores of the time. It's kind of like if you ever watch Stargate. Oh, Daniel Jackson's wife from the planet is Shara, and her father is just Mr. Middle Eastern patriarch.
Yeah.
He's like, okay, you're my daughter. I'm marrying you to Daniel Jackson. And that's like it. He's this very assertive man. And Khan is the same way. He's laying in sickbay. He's been reading stuff on the view screen, and Marla McGivers comes to visit him. And he says, I've been reading up on starships, but they have one luxury not mentioned in the manuals. And Marla says, I don't understand. A beautiful woman. My name is Khan. Please sit and entertain me. Well, okay, dude. You may want to catch up on how culture shifted a little bit.
Yeah, but she goes for it.
Yeah, and then he's like, it's kind of the equivalent of old movies where the guy tells the woman she'd be so much more attractive if she took off her glasses.
Yes.
Marla says, I'd like some historical information about your ship, its purpose, and Khan interrupts her and says, and why do you wear your hair in such an uncomplimentary fashion? As he's just dissing on her
he's
grooming
negging
at the moment.
That's what they call it these days. Negging.
Okay. and she says, well, it's comfortable. And he says, but it's not attractive. And he takes a mirror and loosens a couple of strands of hair, and he says, there, soft, natural, simple. But he's done nothing to her hair.
He really has done nothing. It is wild. I mean,
I think it was just a creepy excuse to get to touch her hair.
Well, there is a brand of these men online out there, the alpha male thing. It's really creepy. It's really wrong. It's stupid. But they have this whole philosophy of being in control, and it's I think it's their response to feminism or something. But there's this whole thing like negging, where you say negative things about a woman, it makes her defensive and want to please you, or so. I don't know what the theory behind it is, but it's stupid.
The way I was raised, you say nice things about a woman if you want to please her and get reciprocal.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know. I'm not sure it works for these guys. But it is he immediately starts this cultivation of her, and whether
he's grooming her.
Yeah, he's really,
and he's doing it passive aggressively,
right?
Because he like confesses, stuff to her about like, I'm going to take over this ship and stuff like that, and then he spurns her if she doesn't want to go along, and it's like, choose or do not choose, but it must be what you decide, and so he's like putting her in this double bind situation.
Right. Like he just casts her off, like whatever, and he's just told her he's going to take over the ship.
It's like, and Marla, report that.
Right. But he knows, like, he's doing it in such a way as sort of like the reverse psychology, where I care so little about you that if you could go and report this, I know you won't. Like, it's sort of this, he's belittling her, in order to gain her trust or something. It's a very alpha male sort of.
It's manipulative,
right?
And it's also a right and flaw that she doesn't immediately go and report this. I mean, they could have still had him take over anyway. It could have been too late or something like that. But Marla, I mean, okay, that is a serious court-martial offense, not to report this to your superior officer.
Right. Now, Kirk makes a mistake earlier when he just gives Khan access to the technical specs of the Enterprise. Like this guy just shows up. Hey, here, catch up on our history. Here's all the top secret information about this starship.
Yeah, it's like in Next Gen, where they just don't have screening controls on the intercom. So when they get 20th century people, they're abusing the intercom.
Right. Then you have when they find out his actual identity and that they escaped. Kirk says, that fact that they escaped isn't in the history text. And Spock says, would you reveal to war-weary populations that some 80 Napoleons might still be alive somewhere? It's like, yeah, that's actually, Spock makes a really good point. I can picture a lot of politicians or whatnot saying, yeah, remember those 80 dictators that were made this war, this eugenics war? They're all gone now. They're dead. They're dead. They're never coming back. So don't worry. I could picture that very easily.
There's an interesting scene, which is kind of where they're teasing Khan's identity out of him. They're having a dinner, and Spock is saying, they're talking about the eugenics war, and Spock was saying there was the war to end tyranny. Many considered it a noble effort. And that pricks Khan's ire. The war against him was a war against tyranny. And he says, tyranny, sir, or an attempt to unify humanity. And Spock says, unify, sir, like a team of animals under one whip, which is like, okay, that's a little bit of a burn. Khan says, I know something of those years. Remember, it was a time of great dreams, of great aspiration. And Spock says, under dozens of petty dictatorships. So like Spock is going hard here. Khan says, one man would have ruled eventually, as Rome under Caesar. Think of its accomplishments. And he's right. I mean, they did have multiple rulers in Rome, and the system was unstable, and eventually one man had to win out. First Julius Caesar, and then later Augustus in the first and second triumvirates. So anyway, he says, think of Rome's accomplishments. Spock says, your sympathies were with, and at this point, the penny drops for Khan. And he notices he's been sparring with Spock while Kirk is silent. And he says, you are an excellent tactician, Captain. You let your second in command attack while you just sit and watch for weakness. Kirk says, you have a tendency to express ideas in military terms, Mr. Khan. This is a social occasion. And Khan says, it has been said that social occasions are only warfare concealed. Many prefer it more honest, more open. And then Kirk goes in and says, "You fled. Why? Were you afraid?" And Khan says, "I've never been afraid. But you left at the very time mankind needed courage." And Khan is triggered by this, and it's like, "We offered the world order."
He pounds the table, I think, at the point. Yeah.
Bang, yeah. And like, Nikita Khrushchev, only without a shoe. And Kirk says, "We?"
Mm-hmm.
And that's the point at which they forced him to admit who he is. And he says, "Excellent, excellent. But you will excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, I grow fatigued. Again, with your permission, Captain, I will return to my quarters." And he gets up and leaves. But he's just been bested by a tag team of Spock and Kirk.
Yeah, that was a great scene. And it really showed Spock and Kirk working together to maneuver this guy who was brilliant in his time and, rose to nearly rule 2/3 of the earth or whatever it was.
A quarter.
It is really interesting how well written Kirk and Spock are in this time, and I don't see any duo in future series who are quite as good at this sort of thing. I mean, Sisko was great, but Kira, I don't know that they wrote her like that, where they could act in tandem.
Yeah, we don't have that with Riker and Picard. We don't have that with Sisko and Kira. We don't have that with Archer and T'Pol or Janeway and Chakotay. This is really, even within the original series, this is an unusually well-written moment.
Yeah.
And I put that down to Gene Kuhn, who was just great. Also apparently a user of speed, which may be how he wrote so fast, but right. But he was really good.
Yeah. I have in my notes this encounter we talked about between McGiver and Khan, and at one point he crushes her hand, and while he's asking her to open her heart, I'm like, I didn't understand that. Like, I'm not understand what we're getting at here. Like, open your heart. What do you mean? Like, fall in love with me as I'm putting you in pain? It was a really weird moment. I didn't understand that one.
Yeah.
So that was weird. And then she immediately jumps to treason, which I felt like you did, unrealistic and kind of pathetic.
Yeah, I can buy accelerated love stories and stuff in the confines of episodic television, but they're really pushing it here.
Yeah, yeah. There is another interesting scene where Kirk and Scotty and I think McCoy they're talking about, now that they know who Khan is, they were kind of expressing admiration for him, and Spock is puzzled.
Yeah, they mentioned that he was the last to be overthrown, and Kirk says he was the best, most dangerous tyrant. Scotty points out there were no massacres under his reign, and McCoy says there was no war until he was attacked. So they're pointing out these good things about him, and Spock is mystified by the admiration that humans can have for someone like this.
Right, right.
But it's kind of like people today, at least historians, who can admire, say, Alexander the Great or Napoleon.
Yeah, right. Kirk says, we can be against him and admire him all at the same time, and Spock says, illogical. And Kirk says, yep.
Yeah, except it's not. You can appreciate your opponent's good points.
Right. Even, when they do have them, right. So Khan takes over the ship, suffocates the bridge crew, then until they're subdued, and then puts Kirk in a oxygen deprivation chamber in sick bay, and basically tortures him to get the crew to cooperate to take control, because he needs the codes, right? We're back to needing the codes, just like we will in Wrath of Khan. And Spock refuses, and Khan. This is one of the things where this is what comes up again in Wrath of Khan. Khan is a man of his time. He doesn't understand the people he's dealing with. He doesn't understand. Spock is a Vulcan. He's not going to react the same way. Even when they're smacking around Uhura, she's defiant. Uhura gets some good moments in this too. She's not going to go along without some severe pressure on her. But Spock won't go along, which is interesting. And it's when Khan says Kirk is going to die, like that's when MacGyver switches back. Like I thought we were going to do this bloodlessly, essentially, is what's in her mind. She doesn't say that, but that's like I imagined her thinking. And so this is when she turns on Khan and helps Kirk and Spock defeat
anesthetizing the guards who were keeping him in the pressurization chamber and stuff.
Right. And yet Khan takes her back, which is interesting. I find that kind of fascinating that he forgives her and is willing to take her along.
Well, I guess his attitudes towards betrayal is easy come, easy go.
I guess. I
mean, he's doing a betrayal right now. Who's he to judge?
Right. And then in Kirk's response, which is interesting, which is, as a captain on the frontier, he gets to deal out justice as he sees fit within the bounds of Starfleet's, policies and procedures.
It struck me that this hearing they do is basically a drumhead.
Yeah.
It's just, okay, let's flip the drum up on its side and administer justice right now.
Right. Yes. The captain's mast. That's what they would call it the U.S. Navy now. Although that's usually for minor offenses. But when you're so far out, sometimes the captain has to do, the justice out there, and he dismisses the charges. Which, what is that? Like, why? Why not just take these historical criminals back to the starbase?
Well, because we're doing a space seed, so they need to form a colony at the end,
right?
And it would take up too much screen time to adjudicate this over and be less dramatic to adjudicate it over subspace radio or take them back to the base and then have them sent to form a colony.
Right. I think
so. They're doing it for streamlining reasons, but properly
and
speaking,
dramatic.
Yeah. But properly speaking, taking them to the starbase. I mean, hey, this is a historical resource. I mean, MacGyver's was not wrong about getting information about that. They don't even have a record of the Botany Bay ship. Because of the patchiness of the records after the war. You need to go you need to debrief these guys. Right.
Yeah. Although 72 Napoleons, I mean, that would be a long ride back. Let's put it that way.
Well, okay. So put them on Elba and then on Space Elba and then send some debriefers in to talk to them.
Right. Go back for them, which would have been better for them in the long run because the SETI Alpha problem. And then we have a reference, a Milton reference, where Khan says, "Are
you up on your Milton?" And Scotty acknowledges he's kind of embarrassed as a Scotsman to not know what that Milton reference is.
And it's the statement Lucifer made when he fell into the pit: "It is better to rule in hell than to serve in heaven," and that's Khan's last word, essentially. And he gets his wish, unfortunately for him.
Although he's happy about it, he says, I've gotten, after Marla decides to stick with him, I guess she's ride or die, he says, and I've gotten something else I wanted, a world to win, an empire to build.
Right.
So he'll be bossing people around in no time, including Marla.
Right. And as you say, Spock says it would be interesting to come back in 100 years to see what has sprung from that, and like it didn't take 100 years; it took 15 for them to show back up again in story time inside the Star Trek universe time.
I just said 15 years because that's the distance in our time between when this episode came out and when Wrath of Khan came out.
I thought it was more like 20 years, right?
Just 15.
Because
Wrath of Khan is like 1982.
Oh yeah, that's right. That is 15. Time flies. Right. Any other notes on this one, Jimmy?
Well, I like them. So with the confrontation in engineering, they don't explain why Khan set the engines to overload. Presumably, because he just starts wailing on Kirk when Kirk shows up. So why have you set the ship to explode? I can headcanon that as he did it as in order to hold the ship hostage. Like this fight was not his original plan. He was planning to hold the ship hostage and say, I won't turn this off unless you back down. But then Kirk attacked him. And so that plan kind of gets put to the side. But he takes Kirk's phaser number 2 and crumples it, which is nice, and it's an effective demonstration of his strength. He then whales the tar out of William Shatner's stunt double, and who is very easy to see that's not William Shatner in long shot.
Yeah.
And he says, he then says, I have 5 times your strength. You're no match for me. And Kirk then pulls out an obviously lightweight handle from engineering. And this is the only time we ever see those handles. Mm-hmm. But he pulls out this clearly lightweight handle and punches Khan in the back and somehow knocks him out. And it's like, okay, that's not an effective takedown. Not for someone who has 5 times your strength, and not with a prop that's obviously like painted styrofoam or something.
Yeah. Kirk is constantly knocking people out by whacking him in the back at the top of the shoulders, not in the head. I don't know what's going on with his clubbing effectiveness. He knows something.
I can only assume that human anatomy is different in the Star Trek universe.
Yes. All right. I think that will do it then for our discussion of Space Seed. And before we go, we want to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create The Secrets of Star Trek, including Roseanne M., Kevin C., Meg P., Dina C., and George H. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue The Secrets of Star Trek and all the shows at StarQuest, and you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. We'd also like to thank Victor Lambs, who edited this episode. So that's it from us. What did you think of Space Seed? You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com/trek, our Facebook page at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, send an email to trek@sqpn.com, or visit our Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. You can watch The Secrets of Star Trek on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia. And we'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the 2009 Star Trek movie, The Kelvin Universe. I know you're looking forward to that, Jimmy. Until next time, Jimmy Akin, thank you for joining me and sharing The Secrets of Star Trek.
I'd rather be on SETI Alpha 5. Live long and prosper.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, insufficient facts always invites danger.